But Calabria is not just for me, I think, not just because I'm Calabrian, is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And it is very particular because in Calabria you find everything, any kind of scenery, any kind of fruits, any kind of vegetables. It looks like if the whole world is concentrated in few kilometers. There is a story that my grandmother used to tell me when I was a child before going to bed. She was telling me this story over and over, always the same, and I was asking as well for the same story, and that was about the creation of Calabria, how Calabria was created, by God. It started with the creation of the world, that God took 6 days to create the world. Then the seventh day he took a rest, and the day after, the eighth day, when he woke up, he realized that he had forgotten Calabria, you know, and because he had already used all the matter available to create the universe, so he decided to take a little piece from each one of the five continents and put them together. And so Calabria was born, was created. And actually, in Calabria, you find, in few kilometers, you go from the coast, maybe from a place that could look like California, you go up to the mountains. In few kilometers, you reach the Sila Mountains in the middle of the region that looks like Canada, with valleys, forests, lakes, and everything else. Then you go to the other side, and you end up in Mexico, in a place that looks like Mexico, with the cactus, dry land and beaches, So that's why it's fantastic. And also you find, as I told you, any kind of fruits here. Any kind of fruits, even the ones that you would imagine to find here. For example, the citron, the etrog, basically, what the Jewish call etrog. The best variety of citron grow in the world grows here in Calabria, in northwest of Calabria. And that variety of citron was brought over to Calabria by the Jewish 2,000 years ago, for example. Then we have the bergamot. The bergamot is a citrus fruit that is a natural mutation. It looks like a grapefruit. When it is ripe, it's yellow, but it is not a grapefruit. It's not a cross. It is not even a cross between an orange and a lemon. It's another kind of fruit. 98% of the worldwide production takes place here in Calabria, because the only other place where you can grow the bergamot is the island of Cyprus, and a small percentage is grown there. The rest here, all around in the province of Reggio Calabria, because you can grow bergamot only there. If you can plant it in another place, even in Catanzaro. If I planted the bergamot in Catanzaro, I would have the plant, but I wouldn't have fruits. It's very strange. It grows in a very limited area, only 100 kilometers of coast. In this little stretch of coast, you can grow bergamot. It's unbelievable. It is used for everything, for perfumes, but now they use it as well to flavor cakes or sweets or cookies. But it has always been the main ingredient for the early gray tea, the English tea. The early gray tea, it's made with bergamot.
So, but going there and particularly visiting the church was really an incredible experience. It was just mind-boggling. And my cousin Alessandro, he speaks very good English, and he wanted to he wanted me to go in the church and meet the priest and get as much information I had. And he was actually like a little aggressive. He's like knocking on the door, knocking on the door. You know, finally I was waiting in the background. Finally, I see this priest come out. The priest is a young guy like him, you know, in his 30s. They're pointing over to me, you know, crazy. So finally the priest says, okay, come in. So I go in, we sit down with the priest in his office, and Alessandro's trying to get, like, he wants to go through like all the books and do research. And I said, Alessandro, I have all this information already. I have everything. So we don't need to bother the priest with this. So anyway, but the church is over 1,000 years old, and it's been added onto, but like the original building is over 1,000 years old. And if you look at the side of the church, on one of the walls, they have the names of all the many of my relatives, but the people who died in World War I and World War II, the names are on the side of the church, and they're all names that I recognize, whether these were Verdicchio people or Roncella, which was another name that married into the family. And so I'm seeing all these names. It's really incredible. I had such an extensive family in this little village. And the priest said to me, this is, you know, where your family comes from. So this is a really amazing story that I'm going to tell you now. So I'm sitting in front of the priest, and I look up to the right on this adjacent wall, and he has a cross, a crucifix. And it's unlike any crucifix that you would typically see. There's no body of Christ on the crucifix. It's just like an inlaid crucifix. As a matter of fact, maybe I can, this is actually the crucifix here. So you can see, looking at this, it's very unusual, right? I mean, it's like gold leaf. It's got, you know, all this like inlay in it. So I had bought this crucifix in Italy when we were in Venice several years ago, and I think it was made in, I bought it in Amalfi, but I think it was made in the Murano factory. So now we're very far away from where I bought this church, like where I bought the crucifix, like hundreds of miles away in this little church in the middle of nowhere. So, and this is the only crucifix that I have in my entire house, hanging up in my dining room. So I look up at that wall on the right-hand side. He has the identical crucifix, not similar, identical. I took a photo of it, all the colors, everything. So I told the priest the story, and, you know, tears came to my eyes because I thought this was really an incredible coincidence. And this is one in millions or billions. I mean, this is crazy. So the priest, without missing a beat, he said to me, he goes, of course. He goes, who do you think brought you here? Why do you think you're here? He goes, God brought you here, and he's just giving you a sign. And that was such a meaningful experience for me.
So, you know, when did you get started with researching the family? When did you get the bug?
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with PhilItaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co.
Well, it was, and this is where I told you, it's an interesting story because I never knew anything about my family history. Nobody in my family knew anything about the family history. And what happened is when I was 21, I'm also from New Jersey, by the way. I grew up in Woodbridge, not too far from you. And my father passed away when I was 21 from cancer. And at his funeral was his uncle, my great uncle, Uncle Billy, as we called him. And Uncle Billy, I said to him, I go, what do you know about the family? Do you know anything about where the Fatarosis came from? And he said, very little, Michael. He goes, all I know is that they were from a wealthier family, and they were a lot of artists and musicians. And I think they were from a town called Grignano. So I took out a little like napkin and I wrote down Grignano on it and I had him spell it and I put it in my pocket and I forgot about it. And I just kept the napkin, tucked away in my house. Maybe someday I would do anything with it. I didn't know. And fast forward about 12, 13 years, I'm in Italy with my first wife, and she had planned a trip for us to kind of do the Italy, down the boot kind of trip. We started in Venice, and then we went to Florence, and then we did Rome, and then she put Positano as the last part of the trip. And so we're sitting in the hotel room in Positano, and it's raining. And we only have like 3 or 4 days in Positano, and she's really mad because, there's nothing to do. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the like local magazines that, you get in every hotel room. They always put out these books and these magazines. So I'm just flipping through them, and there's a map of the area. And on the map, it says Grignano. And I'm like, what? And literally, when you look it on the map, Grignano and Positano are so close. The only problem is there's a mountain range between them. So to get to Grignano, you have to go all the way around the Sorrento Peninsula and then come back inland. But I didn't know that. So I'm like, look how close we are. We're like, it's right there. I have to go. And she's like, no, tomorrow's supposed to be nice. We have to go to Capri. We haven't seen Capri. I'm like, I'm this close to the town that my family is from. I have to go there. And we argued all night. So the next morning we wake up and I had to hire a driver who also spoke English. And so I hired a driver, and she's telling me, oh, this is a waste of time. You're not going to find anything. We should be spending the last day of our vacation in Capri. And I was like, listen, if you want to go to Capri, here's some money, take a boat. It takes you right to Capri, have a nice lunch, do your shopping. I'm doing this for me. I have to do this. So she's like, no, I'm going to come. And I'm just like, oh, this is going to be such a horrendous trip for me. Because, in my ear, I told you weren't going to find anything. I told you this was a waste of time. So the driver goes, where do you want to go? And I said, Grignano. And he looks at me because Positano is absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's like one of the most picturesque places in Italy. And Grignano is kind of run down. It's a real Italian city. It's not tourism. They don't have tourists there. And it's what real Italy is. And so he goes, why do you want to leave Positano and go to Grignano? I said, family research. He goes, oh, okay, I understand. So then we're driving, and for some reason he goes, instead of going to Grignano, why don't we go to Lettere? I said, Lettere? He goes, yeah, Lettere. It's an older town. It's further up the mountain, but they'll have older records. And for whatever reason, I said, okay. And I'm not usually a guy that says, okay, when you're changing my plans. Like, I don't know why I said, okay. I still to this day, if you had to ask me again, 1,000 times out of 1,000 times, I would have said, no, let's go to Grignano. This time I said, yes. So we drive up to Lettere and we stop at the little town hall, the municipal hall, and he goes inside and we go inside and he tells the guy behind the desk, like, oh, I've got Americans here. They're doing family research. So the guy behind the desk goes, okay, well, what's the last name? And he goes, Fattarozzi. The guy looks and he looks around my driver and kind of points to me and he goes, Fattarozzi. He goes, sì, Fattarozzi. He goes, no. Go across the street to the cathedral. They have older records. Okay, so we walk across the street to the cathedral. We walk inside. The priest comes out. Now this time the priest looks at me and goes, passaporto. So I give him my passport and he goes, Fattarozzi. So he takes me off to the side, and on a big plaque, there are all these names of the bishops of Lettere since the 900s through, I think, the 1800s when they lost the bishopcy. And in 1428 to 1440 is the name Factorosa. And I said, no, not Factorosa, Fattarozzi. And he goes, no, same family, just a change in spelling. I said, really? He goes, yes. And I said, Fattarozzi was bishop of this cathedral? And he goes, no, not this cathedral, the old cathedral. So then he walks me outside, and across the way, you could see it from this cathedral is an old castle, a huge old Norman castle in Lettere. And next to that is the ruins of the old cathedral that date back to the year 1000. And they stopped using that cathedral in about the 15 or 1600s. And so my ancestor, well, not ancestor, because he probably didn't have children, but someone in the Fatarosi family was bishop of Lettieri between 1428 and 1440. And then he takes me around to another plaque on the wall in one of the little alcoves. And it's dedicated to Michael Factorosius, spelled the old Latin way.
Latin, yeah.
And Michael, and I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, and he's like, well, Michael is buried below the church. This used to be over his body, but because it had been walked on so much, it was removed from the floor and put on the wall. And that was dated like 1704. So now I'm like, oh my God. And he goes, well, wait here for a minute. He walks out to the priest's little office, and he brings back a book. So he walks upstairs and he brings back this book. Okay. And this is basically the history of the churches in Lettieri. It was written in 1978 by a priest. And so I start thumbing through the book until I get to this page, which I don't know if you can see it, but
Yeah.
it's a family tree sort of the Fatarosi and the Fatarosi de Barnaba families from 1428 to 1891, which is when my great-grandfather left and came to America.
But he comes back to
So
Bari
I'm
in
sitting here.
1920. And he meets another stone carver, and the stone carver's name is Alfonso Scaffa. And Scaffa says, you have talent. I work for the great sculptor Gutzon Borglum, who has a studio in Stamford, Connecticut. I want you to meet him. So he brings Luigi to meet Borglum in Stamford, Connecticut. And Borglum is just blown away with my grandfather's ability. And he says, I want you to quit your job in Bari, Vermont, live on my estate so you could work in the studio with me every day, and you will be my expert in granite and marble. And Luigi is not going to pass up this opportunity to work for a world-renowned sculptor. So he, in the meantime, Alfonso, who lives in Portchester, which is like 15 minutes south from Stamford, says, I want you to come and meet my family. So he brings Luigi down there, and he introduces him to his sister-in-law, who's this little beauty from Abruzzo named Nicoletta Cardarelli. My grandfather falls in love. She returns in kind. And so Alfonso Scaffa not only introduces Luigi to Gutzon Borglum, but to my grandmother. And that's why I'm here. So
Wow.
Luigi ends up living on Borglum's estate with my grandmother for their first year of their marriage. And then he ends up settling in Portchester. And that's why the Del Biancos are all from Portchester in this part of New York.
Yeah, that's neat. And I didn't realize that Borglum, that he did Stone Mountain.
He did do Stone Mountain. In fact, my grandfather was his chief carver at the beginning of that project. Borglum never completed it. In fact, he just started. It's a really kind of a complicated story, and it's one of the reasons why he has a reputation of being a white supremacist, because people thought he was a member of the KKK.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Long story short, the Daughters of the Confederacy approached Borglum about creating a bas-relief of the leaders of the Confederacy on the side of this mountain. And this had never been done before. And Borglum was all about that kind of like, I want to do something bigger, bolder, never been done before. So he takes the project on, but doesn't realize that the silent partners of the, I don't know how silent they were, but the Daughters of the Confederacy were also being funded by the KKK. So Borglum decides that he has to, kind of rub shoulders with the KKK because they're paying him to do this work. So I don't know if he became a card-carrying member, but obviously he has his association with them. But the KKK starts making more demands. They want a tableau added to the Confederacy statues of a slave on his knees, thanking his master for giving him a good life. Can you imagine? And Borglum, I don't know, Borglum, whether he doesn't want to do that for artistic reasons or whether he is morally against that. I don't know, but he smashes the models. He says, I'm not doing this project. I'm out of here. And the KKK sends the police after him, and he's on a high-speed chase in the middle of the night with the little son.
Wow.
I don't know if Luigi was with him because he had Luigi down there working with him. My grandfather never talked about it. And he leaves Georgia. And Doan Robinson, the state historian who's looking to create something to attract tourism in South Dakota, reads about this story. He says, this is the kind of guy I need to do my mountain sculpture. And that's how he finds out about Borglum. And he eventually hires Borglum to do Mount Rushmore.
When Mount Rushmore was first started, was your grandfather involved from the outset, or he brought him in later on?
A good question. Mount Rushmore started in 1927, and it moved very slowly. The carving moved very slowly. And by 1933, the head of Washington was about 3/4 of the way done. And Borglum realized, that most of the men working on the mountain were unemployed miners that had no work during the Depression, and he hired them because the money coming in from the government was now coming in during the Depression, and funding was really limited. And Borglum had a really hard time getting classically trained stone carvers because, number one, he needed people that were physically strong because this was really demanding work. 2, you couldn't be afraid of heights. And 3, you had to be able to carve on such a grand scale and to be able to adapt the perspective. Imagine carving and finishing eyes and making sure that from 1,000 feet away, 5,000 feet away, that it looks, real and convincing. And you have no sense of, you're carving a bust. You could step away 3 feet, but how do you step away a mile every time you carve? And so he needed somebody with that ability, and he didn't have any trained hands to do that. And my grandfather had already been working for Borglum all throughout the 20s, and that's when he realized, I need somebody with Luigi's ability. So he hires him in 33 to be the chief carver.
So we come from similar backgrounds. I am an Italian boy from Queens. I think I have a couple of years on you, maybe. Well, maybe I have a lot of years on you, but
nah.
It was so exciting when I was, reviewing before the show and seeing how you do the things with the family, because I come from one very crazy Italian family and one not so crazy. So the first thing I want to ask you is you're probably doing what all us crazy Italians would love to do and think we should do, is talk about our families. So how did you start all of this?
We all talk about our families, don't we? For me, it was something that I've always knew I wanted to do. I always wanted to create a one-person show in sort of that genre where you're impersonating characters and there's music, because I sing as well, and it sort of feels as if it could be a traditional, Broadway show to a stand-up act. And I wanted to sort of combine all of those elements together. Because that's a little bit of what I do. I wouldn't say I'm just a stand-up comedian or I'm just a theater actor. I wanted to mush it all together into one fun night. And then, of course, what else would I talk about would be my family, because growing up in an Italian family, you impersonate everyone as a kid. That's what we did. We made fun of each other. We poked fun. We impersonated someone. I mean, my family still does that. We tease a lot. So growing up in a family like that, I always knew that if I was going to write a show, my first show out of the gate would be something that would be near and dear to me, because it's so easy, right? Impersonating these family members are so easy because you've been doing it your whole life. So for me, it was that's the story I want to tell. And then you have to sort of sit down and say how to craft the story. So for me, it was, I knew I wanted to tell it with my grandmother as the forefront, because she was such a specific human. I mean, I've never met anyone as unique as her. She is not a traditional Italian grandmother. We always think of those grandmothers with those house dresses, ugly orthopedic shoes, and rollers in their hair. And that was not my grandmother on my father's side at all. She was a complete different human that I've ever witnessed. I mean, she wore sexy dresses and spike heels and cigarettes, and she always looked like a model coming out of a 1960s catalog up until her death, to be quite honest with you. So it was sort of that energy of just, I've never seen anyone like that. And we didn't even call her grandma. We called her Franny. So it was a definite different feel, because my other grandma, my mother's mother, was this little angel who cooked over a stove for thousands of us and always wore the house dresses. So a very different energy. But I knew if I was going to do a show, I was going to write it in the vein of the Franny character.
And that's neat. And your grandmother is probably the same age that my mom and my aunts would be. They would all be, if unfortunately none are left, but if they were left, they'd all be in their 90s, close to 100 by now.
Yeah, my grandmother, I think she'd be 88,
Yeah,
87,
yeah.
something like that she'd be
Yeah.
today.
I have cousins that are 88, so there you see how old I am.
No, I get it. Big Italian family.
When my grandfather passed away, he died when I was like 2 months old. She wore black from the day he died until the day she died.
Oh, goodness. Oh,
My
goodness.
mom's mom wore the black dress for 3 days and then went back to the Vestalia, and that was it. You know, she was just, grandma again. And the old Italian ladies didn't like that, and she said, what am I going to do?
Right. I mean, my grandmother, it's actually quite odd that I'm going to tell this story, but my grandmother, I used to spend time with her. She lived on Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. And I remember spending a day with her, and she said, we have to, I have to do errands. And we had to go to a funeral of a friend. And I was maybe 7 or 8.
That was an errand.
That was an errand. And she took me on the date to the funeral. And she wore this red, sparkly dress, very tight fitting to a funeral. And I remember everyone being in black. And I thought, she looks odd. We're dressed in regular clothes and she's got this bright red outfit on. And I remember asking her later, I was like, why, everyone was in black. Why weren't we in black? She goes, why were they in black? And I was like, all right. And that was her answer. Her answer was like, why do we have to be in black? Like there was no real reason to her to wear black. And it wasn't honoring or dishonoring in her eyes. It was just, this is what I want to wear. So we went. Yeah.
Well, growing up in the 50s and early 60s, funerals were just, that was a way of life in the Italian family.
Yeah, of course,
It went for 3 days, morning and night.
Yes, we're screaming over the casket. I know. Trust me, I know. We're all there. I've been to those as a child, and I'm like, oh, very dramatic these are.
But we ate well because in between everybody went back to my grandmother's and ate. And they only lived like 3 blocks from the funeral home. So that, we would sit on the chairs from the funeral home and all of that.
Yeah, they knew a guy, as my dad.
Yes, absolutely.
A lady comes out on the alley and asks, was actually wondering who these guys were. And this is one of the things I hate the most. When I on the streets in Italy and I got to talk to clients on the phone, sending voicemails or WhatsApp to my project coordinator, Jeanette, or Justin, my US manager that we have in Connecticut as well. Well, I speak English on the street and people just turn around at me and, wonder who the alien is that's talking this alien language. But so the lady did the same thing when we were on a tour. And she came up with a huge key in her hands, like as though she had done it on purpose, but there's no purpose then. She just brought this key out of her pocket. I had no idea where it came out of her pants or skirt. And she took us to church that I had no idea existed because it was not a parish church. It was just a little chapel church, if you will. No chapels like Vegas has, but a chapel. And St. Lucy's. Well, remember this St. Lucy thing goes, St. Lucy is the protector of sight, for your eyes and all. For those who believe, you hail St. Lucy for that you can protect your eyes. Well, sure thing, there were ex-votos. I'm not sure how you guys call it in English, but ex-votos is sort of a piece of metal made or wood made item, or I shouldn't say souvenir, but it's more of like a commemorating piece of, I of course now struggling, but, something that you do to worship the saint in favor of, for the favors that he or she gave, for whatever miracle that you believe he or she made happen for you. Well, sure indeed, there were tons of these pieces and items and objects at the feet of St. Lucy's statue. That's why I'm really focusing on this St. Lucy, because it was all about eyes, pieces of eyes, nice carved in stone or metal. Well, the first and only one that a client picked up from the feet of the statue was metal made. And the story goes, the tradition goes, well, actually the lady said, you got to approach it through your eyes, just kind of hiding your eyes, and have whoever's taking a picture, being your picture taker, just take a shot. And so you could protect yourself from that moment. It's kind of a traditional thing. Sure thing it did. But then after the picture was taken, I still remember this, God, of course, for those who listen to this, not watching, it's going to be not good, but I'm going to just show this on video. got this off his eyes and shouted in the middle of the chapel. I was like, what's going on? he goes, you won't believe this. His great grandparents' names were on it. He had picked up among all the others. He had picked up a metal made ex voto that his great grandparent had sent off to Italy from America, Connecticut, because what they wanted to do is, you guys sell this item and you make money to repair the church. That was the whole thing. But I never knew there was never, fused. It was never melted down to make money or whatever. It was, dropped there at a statue. After 100 or more years, the same part, a member of that same family came back and picked it up just by chance. I mean, there's no purposeful surprise. It was a whole thing that was meant to happen. It was great.
Small town as well, but in Abruzzo, and it's called Bugnara, and it's outside of a bigger city called Sulmona. And Sulmona has something that it's very well known for. It is the city of the confetti, the almond, the candy-coated almonds that they give out at the weddings.
Really?
So Sulmona, yes, Sulmona is like the capital of where they make confetti, and they sell them all over the world. So two different regions there. Proud of both. And
now, and as soon as you said confetti, I knew what you meant, right?
Exactly,
but the young kids probably were thinking about confetti.
You're 100% right. I don't even know if back, I think in the day, confetti were like a staple at weddings. I don't think they are as much now, although it's still, they're still sold, like I said, but I don't think it's as popular.
I want to start shooting at 6 o'clock in the morning because I'm a crazy person and we're American or Sicilian American. And, I like to get it going. It's going to be hot. It was like 120 degrees there the first day I was there. I was like, wow. So I said to the guys, we got to be here early. We got to be here by, 8 o'clock, whatever. They're looking at me like I'm crazy, 8 o'clock. They want to show up at noon, have their espresso, then show up. And this is what was happening. And I would say, guys, and then we would have these long lunches because they didn't want to work or they didn't want to work, past 5 or 6 hours. But on several occasions, I'd be waiting and they would be late. I'd have to get them their espresso to get them in the right frame of mind. And then once we got going, we did well, but we had to get them going. And now understand this, none of them understand English. So I'm speaking to a crew that totally looks at me like I have 3 heads. So now I have a guy with me who's a translator who's actually in the film with me. He translates everything. So it's hilarious. It's like I'm saying it to him, he's saying it to them, they're saying it back to him, and he's saying it to me. And we're shooting this movie, and even though we didn't understand each other, we kind of understood each other because there was so much passion in it and so much love in it and so much. I thought my feelings is that they had a lot of respect for me because I was coming to a place and representing them in a very, very deep way and an honest way. And I think they really, really respected that about me. But I also was so honored that they embraced me as one of their own. And that was very special. But I remember also another funny story was we were doing a scene and it was like a long scene and I had a close up and I was like, okay guys, and I tell the guy, give him whatever, just make sure the camera's here, whatever. So we action it, and I'm doing the scene and I'm into it. There's the whole thing, and I'm listening. I'm doing the whole thing, and it's all the cameras, and they were looking at me like, and I'm starting to realize like, why are they just like sitting there, like kind of just sitting there, like just like looking around, like not even they're not holding the cameras, and I'm starting to think, what the. So then finally, I finish the sequence, and we're sitting there, and I go, all right, cut. And the guy looks at me, and goes, cut. We no roll. I said, what do you mean? He goes, we don't put camera on yet. I see, so the whole scene I was doing, they didn't have the camera on. And who am I going to blame? I blame myself. It's my fault. I did it wrong, but they don't understand sometimes, it's just, but that's what makes it kind of, there's a funniness to it and a nuance to it because you try to like explain it to them. There was days that we were doing a sequence and I'm like, no. I remember this lady, Maria, she's so sweet. I said, Maria, no. All I need is you to do this. Okay. Action. And she would do the total opposite. No, Maria, do this. Okay, no problem. Again, we must have did it 35 times. And she finally, I, but you know what? They were lovely. And I wouldn't trade that experience for anything I've ever done in Hollywood, anything I've done anywhere. The love and the friendships and the respect and the honor and the laughs and the cries were spectacular.
So I have to ask you, because we think we eat Italian food, and what's the biggest differences between Italian food in Italy and Italian food here?
Maybe you guys mix too much in just one plate. Because, for instance, spaghetti meatballs. Actually, in Italy, we eat spaghetti and then we eat meatballs because it's the first course and the second course. And so this is because the main difference that I notice here is that, and this reflects your being Americans as well, is that you tend to put in the same plate all the different parts of a meal, and because it's just the way you usually do. And so, and each separately taken, they are each originally Italian meals, because spaghetti is spaghetti and curry is Italian, and also the meatballs. And so just this is one of the examples that comes to my mind. But yes, and also this kind of mixing ingredients, like chicken parmigiano, for instance, which is not Italian, as a traditional recipe. But I also know that back in the days, people who had to cook didn't find all the ingredients they need in order to cook the recipe in the traditional way, and so they try to invent something with what they had at hand. And so as we Italians are very creative, so all these kind of Italian American recipes were born. But I like them. I like to try everything.